Welcome to our Lively You Virtual Learning Academy. Today's program is on sexual and domestic violence prevention, and we're very fortunate to have our featured speaker here, Anne Miner, prevention specialist from the Cocoon Shelter. Please welcome Annie.
Thank you. Hi, so I'm from the Cocoon, and so my job is prevention specialist. I do a lot of community and educational outreach, both with the broader community, but also with Bowling Green State University. And I talk a lot about how to prevent violence before it happens. So that's called primary prevention. And it's a tall order that requires the help of everyone, but I believe it can be done. So if you're not familiar with the Cocoon, I'll just give a brief overview right now, and then I'll explain a little more later on. But we are a comprehensive sexual and domestic violence agency, and we are located here in Wood County. And we also offer emergency housing in our shelter, if that is required. So today we will be discussing sexual and domestic violence prevention. So before I begin, I just wanted to give a brief overview about what sexual violence is, just so that we're all on the same page. So what is sexual assault? So sexual assault and sexual violence can kind of be used interchangeably. It is any sexual contact that is given without consent or when consent is not given freely. So examples are rape, sexual harassment, force or coercion, and stalking. So you see rape here as an example. I think in everyday speak, we kind of interchange sexual assault and rape, which is fine, but it has a very narrow technical legal definition. So sexual assault is just kind of the broader umbrella term. And then force or coercion, that's an example when consent is not given freely. So if someone is being threatened or repeatedly asked to do something and finally they just give in and say yes, that is not technically consent because they are not giving it freely. So I'm throwing the word consent around a lot, so I will define that as well. It is given freely, clearly, and enthusiastically as a yes, not a maybe, not a we can, but it's always has to be a yes. It's given every time, and it's also given for every act, I guess, in one situation. So just one yes is not a blanket yes for the entire night. So it's best to just continue to check in with your partner on both sides. And it can be taken away at any time, which is a key part. So we'll go over some sexual assault myths and facts. So I'll put a statement up on the screen, and since we're kind of in a virtual setting, I'll just have you think in your head if you think it's a myth or a fact, and then I'll explain it and give the correct answer. So the first statement is rape is about sexual gratification for the perpetrator. Is this a myth or a fact? And this is a myth. So sexual assault and just honestly violence in general is really about power and control that the perpetrator has or feel they have over another person. Straight men can be sexually assaulted. This is true. No matter your gender or your sexual identity, you can be, and unfortunately, people are sexually assaulted. Many times, survivors of sexual violence know the person who assaulted them. This is also true. So of course, there are the instances like the highly publicized Brock Turner case, or the Stanford swimmer case, as it was also called, where Brock Turner did not know his victim, but many times survivors of sexual assault do know their perpetrator. It could be a friend, it could be a coworker, a classmate, a friend of a friend. or unfortunately, it could also be an intimate partner that they are in a relationship with. Only women can get a sexual assault examination. This is false. So again, anyone, no matter gender or sexual identity, can get a sexual assault examination. In Ohio, at least, a lot of hospitals have specially trained nurses who are on staff. They are called sexual assault nurse examiners, or SANEs for short. And so if you need a sexual assault exam done, you can go into the emergency department and just tell the front desk person that you need that done, and they'll call the SANE on call, or they'll send you to a hospital that definitely has a SANE on call. Also, if you go to a hospital and need this done, an advocate from the Cocoon or from a similar organization, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, will be called also, so that you don't have to sit by yourself and get this done. Someone will be there to provide resources and emotional support. The only stipulation with these sexual assault exams are they need to be done within 96 hours of the assault. This is because our bodies kind of naturally replenish fluids, we lose skin cells, we lose hair follicles. So after about 96 hours, any evidence that can be collected really isn't conclusive. And then survivors of sexual assault can be very calm and controlled. This is true. So I think in a lot of popular media, there's after a traumatic event or a natural disaster, a lot of the survivors are always very, they're crying and they're screaming, which is totally okay. And some people do respond that way, but others don't. Others are very calm and controlled. Others, you wouldn't even know that something has happened. And this is because just like everyone is different, everyone will respond to trauma differently. And there's no one correct way to respond to trauma, which is why it goes along with that old adage that we really only know about 1% of what's happening in a person's life. So no matter how they're acting, it's best just to be kind. Okay, so we'll move on to domestic violence. So I will define it again, just so we're all using the same definition. So domestic violence is a pattern of coercive control that includes the use or threat of physical abuse, emotional or verbal abuse, sexual abuse, psychological manipulation, stalking, threats against others, and/or economic abuse. So some examples are using intimidation to make the survivor afraid, isolation, and isolation can be physically moving a survivor away from their hometown or town where they have friends and family. And/or it could be taking away the survivor's phone, computer, car, any way for them to contact or see loved ones. It could include using children against the survivor or to spy on the survivor, reproductive coercion, which is attempting to get a survivor pregnant or stopping a survivor from getting pregnant, no matter what the survivor wants. And then also gaslighting, which is when a perpetrator manipulates reality basically to make the survivor think that they're going crazy. Okay, so here's some domestic violence myths and facts, and we'll do the exact same thing that we just did with the sexual violence. Survivors of domestic violence come from all racial, social, economic, class, and religious backgrounds. Do you think that's a myth or a fact? And this is a fact. Violence discriminates against no one, so which means that anyone can be subjected to it, unfortunately. Domestic violence is a family matter and should be solved within the family without outside interference. This is a myth. So this may have been the general societal viewpoint at one time, but thankfully it has changed, especially with the creation of agencies like the Cocoon that do offer this external support to survivors. So really this is false. And if you know of someone who is experiencing domestic violence, the best thing is to get them into contact with an agency like the Cocoon to kind of help them safety plan and figure out next steps. Survivors of domestic violence will almost never admit that they are being abused. This is false. Survivors will disclose to you if they feel like they can trust you and if they feel like they are in a safe environment at the time. Legally, spouses can use physical violence against one another in their own home. This is false. So again, this may have been the law at one time, but thankfully it has since changed, and it is illegal to use violence against anyone, no matter where it happens or your relationship or their relationship to one another. It is illegal. Alcohol and/or drug use is a major cause of domestic violence. This is false. So this one's kind of tricky. Alcohol and drug use are used as an excuse by abusers, but really abusers cause abuse. And if we think about it, it makes sense because, you know, if you get a little tipsy, the alcohol isn't going to force you to do something you wouldn't normally do while sober. So abusers cause abuse. Okay, good job. So unfortunately, anyone at any age can be subjected to violence, which is why it's super important for us to all work together to work to prevent violence from happening. So how can you help prevent sexual and domestic violence? There's something called bystander intervention, which you may have heard of before. I think it's kind of become a little bit of a buzzword in recent years, which is great. But I will explain what it is in case you don't know. So bystander intervention is a method for third parties to use to help stop sexual or domestic violence from happening before it can happen. Bystanders are never ever expected to put themselves in a potentially harmful situation. And there are multiple methods that you can choose to intervene to avoid putting yourself in a harmful situation. So the first method is to directly intervene yourself. So this could take the form of just going up to the two parties who are in conflict and asking for directions or complimenting one of the outfits. This is merely to insert yourself literally into the situation and let them know that you are there and you see them. The second is to try and create a distraction. So this is used to pull the two conflicting parties out of the moment so that they kind of recognize their surroundings and realize that there are people around. So this could be honking your car horn or dropping something to make a super loud noise, just to make them aware again that you're there. And finally, you can call for backup. So whether that's asking a friend or if there's a trusted peer like a police officer or someone else who's around, you can ask them to go and intervene just because the situation is making you uncomfortable. All of these are equally valid and they are equally effective. So there are some barriers to intervening, and these are personal barriers that we all have. I've been doing the work for 4 years and I have personal barriers. Everyone has personal barriers. Nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to want to try and hide. It's just important to be aware of your personal barriers so that you can choose which method is the best to intervene. Okay, so how can we prevent violence in older populations? So violence takes many similar forms in older populations as it does in others. However, there's another layer that's kind of added, especially if the perpetrator is the caregiver, the primary caregiver for the individual. The caregiver could speak for the individual and make all the decisions, which is a pattern of kind of control. And then also if the caregiver withholds transportation or withholds contact from the individual's family members, this is isolation tactics. So there's also the psychological, sexual, physical abuse that may occur as well in older populations. And of course, it's not just the caregiver who could be a perpetrator. That was just an example. But it's important for us to recognize that violence does not occur in a vacuum. So if one form of violence is occurring, it's most likely that there's another one that's happening as well. So here I'm just going to give some stats from 2020. This is not meant to be a downer. It's not meant to scare or depress you, but just kind of make you aware of the prevalence of violence in older populations. So here's the first stat. It's that 55.8% of adults 65 and older are women. And then women make up about 66% or 2/3 of elder abuse survivors. About 1 in 10 of older adults have been survivors of elder abuse, and 65% of these are women. So we're seeing a skew, just like in other populations, towards women experiencing more abuse, but this does not mean that men don't experience it as well. 90% of elder abuse occurs in domestic settings. Even modest abuse can lead to a higher mortality rate. Sexual abuse tends to occur between spouses and intimate partners, but of course it can happen from family members, caregivers, strangers, so it's not just spouses and intimate partners. Domestic violence by an intimate partner may be a continuation over a lifetime, or it could be considered late onset. And then older women who are looking for companionship may enter an abusive relationship for the first time. Okay, so what are some barriers to response and prevention for violence in older populations? Now, this is just like the personal barriers to bystander intervention. This is just to make you aware so that hopefully you can choose, if you need to, you can choose a different pathway to get help. So there is always social stigma when disclosing violence, always. There could be a layer of potential disabilities that could harm the credibility of a survivor. And I put that in air quotes because it doesn't harm the credibility, but it could be seen to. There could be a fear of further harm, which is typically present for survivors of any age. There could be a reluctance to report, especially if it is a family member, and that's seen in any case, again, where there is a family member or a loved one perpetrating the violence, unfortunately. There could be a potential confusion of reports with dementia or marks on the body as a sign of normal aging. And there could be delayed medical or police assistance and contaminated evidence. So for all of these barriers, advocates from the Cocoon or an organization like the Cocoon can help overcome these barriers for a survivor so that the survivor can get the assistance and help that they need. So what to do if you or a loved one has experienced sexual or domestic violence? First, know that it is never ever the survivor's fault. We also must be supportive of and believe our survivors and know that the Cocoon can help. This is a great resource that's located right here in Wood County. Call the Cocoon hotline. It's 419-373-1730, option 2. And you can explore options and resources and get support. And it's not just a survivor of violence who can call the hotline. Loved ones can call also. And the hotline advocate can give support and options to loved ones as well. And the hotline is 24/7. So no matter what time, no matter what day, someone will always answer the phone. If you're in immediate danger or your environment is not safe, definitely call emergency services and then call the Cocoon. If you're not comfortable calling emergency services or you can't, call the Cocoon anyways, and the advocate can kind of help you plan next steps. So here is our website, and here are our social media handles. There's our hotline again at the bottom. Every 2 weeks, I post a prevention video on Facebook and Instagram. So if you have access to those two, you can tune into those. Other services that the Cocoon provides, we have crisis support, safety planning, legal and medical advocacy, and then we have that shelter for safe housing. And then here's our hotline once again, if you need it. And then here's my information. If you have any questions that you think of later, or you don't want to ask in front of everyone, or if you have comments, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to connect. And email is probably the best way, but yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Annie, for your support of our programming on our Lively U Virtual Learning Academy. And just to note that this program will be shared on our YouTube channel at Wood County Committee on Aging, Inc.